Hey y'all, I'm Dawn and welcome to Designs by Gaddis. If you love farmhouse decor on a budget, be sure to subscribe. Today I have some more high-end farmhouse decor DIYs. Now for the first DIY. This is an adorable DIY that can be personalized in so many ways. I used my laser cutter to cut out several of these adorable little stocking hats or beanies. I cut several small ones and a couple of larger ones. If you would like to do this DIY and need the pre-cut ornaments, you'll find a link in the description. I used scrapbook paper and traced around the beanie using a pencil. And then cut the scrapbook paper out. I applied a layer of Mod Podge and positioned the scrapbook paper on the wood cutout. Once the Mod Podge had set up, I used a fingernail file and rubbed in a downward motion to remove the excess paper and to get a smooth cut. I applied another layer of Mod Podge over the top of the scrapbook paper. I used this tassel maker you'll find in my Amazon store to create the pom-pom on top of the beanie. You'll find a link to my Amazon store in the description. I placed a piece of yarn in the center and then began wrapping the yarn around the two posts. I placed the posts as close together as I could since this is going to be a pom-pom and not a tassel. Once I had the thickness I wanted, I took the string from the bottom and tied a tight knot in the center. Using a pair of scissors, I cut the loops on both sides of the string and cut the long piece of yarn from my roll. I gathered all the yarn in my hand, but left the two long pieces dangling, and began trimming pieces to create my pom-pom. I used an X-Acto knife to remove the scrapbook paper from the hole at the top. I placed one of the long strings through the hole and tied a knot at the back. I then tied the ends of the long string together to make the hanger for the ornament. And when I was finished, I had this adorable little beanie ornament. I applied the little wood piece to the front of the beanie using hot glue. I used my Cricut and cut out some family names to apply to the beanies. I'm going to use them as gift tags on the kids' gifts this year. I think all these little beanies turned out so stinking cute and are perfect for the holiday season. Don't forget, if you would like to decorate your own beanies, you will find a link in the description for the pre-cut wood pieces. I picked up this cute little truck from Dollar Tree for $5, and the rest of the supplies I used were from my stash. I wanted to add a farm-style bed to the back of the truck. To do this, I used 6 tumbling tower blocks and some craft sticks. And believe it or not, the craft sticks were a perfect fit. The truck bed has a little bit of a lean to it, so I placed the blocks in the bed and marked them with a pencil. I glued the craft stick to the first block and placed it in the back of the truck to make sure it was lining up the way I wanted. I placed the block at the other end of the truck and marked it with a pencil. And glued it to the craft stick. And then did the same thing with the middle block. I then glued another craft stick to the top of my blocks. I placed the rails in the back of the truck to make sure everything was still lining up. I did the same thing for the rails on the other side. I used antiquing wax and stained the rails. I stained both sides and the top of the blocks. Since hot glue isn't the best on metal, I used super glue for the bond and a little hot glue to hold it in place until the super glue set up. I found some of these small craft sticks and decided to use them on the back, and they fit perfectly also. I hot glued them to the blocks at the back of the truck and stained them to match the rest. And will you look at how stinking cute. I cut some vinyl and attached it to a mini chalkboard sign from my stash. I placed the sign on the rails and then placed a Christmas tree in the back. This is my new favorite, and the best part is it's interchangeable. Just make up a new sign and place something seasonal in the back. Let me know what you think in the comments. For this Kirkland's inspired Christmas dupe, I painted an 18 by 24 inch canvas with black acrylic paint. I also made sure I painted all 4 sides of the canvas. I centered a large Christmas stencil onto the black canvas using a tape measure. I attached the stencil to the canvas by rubbing it down and tried to get most of the air bubbles out. I have found out that it's tricky when stenciling on canvas because the canvas has a lot of give, so your lines may be a little wonky and you will have to do a little cleanup. I applied white chalk paste to the stencil with a couple of squeegees. I tried to leave the chalk paste thick because I'm going to use some other colors also. Next, I used a tan chalk paste for the stems. And green and white for the leaves and berries at the bottom. I removed the excess paste from the stencil. And when I removed the stencil from the canvas, this is what I had. As you can see, I had some bleed through and some of the paste had dried in a few spots and pulled up when I removed the stencil. Using a small paintbrush and the same black acrylic paint I had used on the canvas, I touched up areas where the paste had bled through. I really like the way it looks distressed where the paste had lifted up, so I left that like it was. This is the Kirkland's inspiration for this DIY, and for $60 it's well out of my budget for Christmas decor. I now have this beautiful painting to add to my Christmas decor this holiday season. Let me know in the comments if you would have touched it up more, or do you like the distressed look? For this Kirkland's inspired DIY, I used a wood tray from Dollar Tree and painted it with 2 coats of white acrylic paint. I'm not going to bore you with the painting because I think we all know how to paint with a single color. While the paint dried, I used my Cricut and cut out this file from design bundles. I decided I wanted to stencil the tray instead of putting the vinyl on, so I used this orange vinyl, which I have a ton of and rarely use for projects. After cutting, weeding, and applying to transfer paper, I placed the stencil on the tray and removed all the air bubbles. And please excuse my head being all in the shot, but this is a Christmas gift for my niece and nephew, so I wanted it to be perfect. Next, I covered the stencil with Mod Podge so I could make sure the stencil cream didn't bleed under the stencil. Once the Mod Podge was good and dry, I used some black stencil cream and applied it to the stencil. And removed the stencil, trying my best not to get any of the black stencil cream on the tray. I washed my hands several times just to make sure, because y'all know how I love to make a mess when I'm creating. Once I got most of the bigger pieces of the vinyl off, I used a pair of tweezers and my Cricut weeding tool to remove the smaller pieces. Removing all the vinyl took me quite a while, but I think it was well worth it in the end. To touch up some of the areas, I used the same white acrylic paint and a small paintbrush to cover where the black cream had gotten. And then went back with black acrylic paint to fix any problems with the black. And I continued touching up until I thought it was perfect for a gift. The final step was to seal it. I used dishwasher safe Mod Podge and applied it to the entire tray, both the inside and the outside portions. And when I was finished, I have this adorable tray for my niece and nephew to put snacks on for Santa and its reindeers this Christmas Eve. For this Kirkland's-inspired DIY, I used a Dollar Tree frame and some scrapbook paper I found in my stash. I cut the scrapbook paper down so it would fit the frame by tracing around the piece of cardboard from inside of the frame and then simply cutting it with some scissors. I then placed the scrapbook paper into the frame and closed everything back up. I used my Cricut and cut out the phrase "Deck the Halls" from some black vinyl. After centering the vinyl and attaching it to the glass part of the frame, I removed the transfer paper. And just look at how high-end and cute this little Kirkland's-inspired frame turned out. I purchased a bag of white flowers from my Amazon store for this project. I had the cone in my stash from last Christmas. I trimmed the feathers down to about the same length and began hot gluing them around the cone. I used a Dollar Tree silicone finger protector while I held the feathers in place. When I got to the top, I glued two feathers across from each other and then added two more feathers on the sides of these. I hope that makes sense. I was trying to round off the feathers instead of making them look square. Once I had the cone mostly covered, I went back in with more feathers to fill in any gaps and holes. I trimmed the feathers around the bottom because the feather tree wasn't wanting to sit flat, and I think it was because of the longer feathers on the bottom. To finish the tree off, I placed a rusty metal star on top of it. And just look at how elegant and adorable it turned out. I may do another one with some gray feathers that I have on hand. I think they would look amazing sitting on a mantel or a table together. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I used a 5x7 picture frame for my stash for this adorable Christmas sign. I traced around the mat from inside of the frame and cut out some scrapbook paper. I cut some vinyl and a piece of cardstock using my Cricut. I weeded the vinyl and applied it to transfer tape. I placed the saying in the center of the cardstock and applied the vinyl. I used a Dollar Tree glue stick and attached the cardstock in the center of the scrapbook paper. And then placed everything back inside of the picture frame. This is the Kirkland's inspiration image. The Kirkland's piece is larger than the one I made, but with a price tag of $105, a larger one could be done for a lot less. I made mine to suit my decor, and I think it turned out so stinking cute. Let me know what you think in the comments. I saw a holiday sign in Hobby Lobby the other day and knew I had to make one for my own Christmas decor. I used a piece of Dollar Tree wood and sanded it lightly with a sanding block. I then painted the entire piece with Craftsmart Holiday Red acrylic paint. I cut out a couple of words with my laser cutter, but this can easily be created using a vinyl cutter. I used a black paint pen to paint the words. I used my Cricut to cut out the rest of the words on white vinyl. After weeding and applying to transfer tape, I added the vinyl to the sign. I had measured the wood so I could place the wording around the edge of the wood. And as you can see, somehow I lost the T in Santa. I simply cut the word out again and applied the T later. I used Gorilla Clear Grip glue and a toothpick to glue the words to the center. and then used the toothpick to remove the glue that seeped out from under the letters before it had time to dry. I think this holiday sign turned out perfect. It is exactly what I saw in my head. I found some glass mason jars in my stash and wanted to make a Christmas centerpiece. I added some gloss Mod Podge to some white chalk paint and stirred it well. I painted the larger jar with the white mixture. I think I got this jar from Dollar General last year. I thought it was so cute with the candy cane on the front. Once the first layer was dry, I went ahead and painted the jar with 2 more coats of the white. I wrapped some twine around the top of the jar and created a little tassel. This was a little harder than usual because of my bandaged finger. For the 2 smaller jars, I mixed red chalk paint and Mod Podge together and painted both of them with 2 coats. To finish these 2 off, I wrapped twine around the top of the first one and tied a little bow. And the other one, I just wrapped some twine around the top. By this time, my finger was throbbing and I just couldn't tie another bow. I added florals from my stash to each of the jars. And now I have this adorable Christmas centerpiece. I think it turned out so stinking cute. But let me know what you think in the comments. I think this may be my favorite DIY. It turned out so amazing. I used this sign from my stash to copy a Kirkland's Christmas sign. I taped up the frame with painter's tape and then painted the inside with black acrylic paint. I glued 2 wood tags together. I used Gorilla Clear Grip glue for this, but you could use hot glue if you prefer. I decided I would stencil Mary onto the wood tags, but you could always just use the vinyl. After applying the vinyl stencils to the wood tags, I applied a thin layer of Mod Podge so the paint wouldn't leak under the letters. I then applied some black acrylic paint over the letters using a pouncing motion. After drying the paint with my heat gun, I removed the vinyl. I strung a bead and then a tag onto a piece of twine until I had all the tags on the twine. I found the center of the sign using a tape measure and placed a small pencil mark for reference. I eyeballed the center of the word Christmas and applied it to the lower portion of the sign. I arranged the twine, tags, and beads onto the top portion of the sign. Using a tape measure to keep the spacing between each of the I used a tape measure to keep the spacing between each tag close. I wasn't worried about it being perfect, but I didn't want it to look wonky. I then glued the tags into place with hot glue. I brought the twine up over the top of the sign and hot glued it to the back. And just look at how stinking cute. I can't wait to display this one. For this project, I used the same candle I used in one of my first DIY videos ever. I still use it for pictures, so instead of removing the vinyl, I decided to use the back side for this DIY. I cleaned the back with rubbing alcohol to remove any dust and oils from the jar. I used my Cricut and cut out the vinyl, weeded it, and applied it to transfer tape. I used a couple of wooden letters I had sitting on my work table to hold the candle in place so it wouldn't roll over. I placed the vinyl on the jar and centered it before removing the transfer tape. This is the inspiration image from Kirkland's for $30. Mine didn't cost me hardly anything. Perfect to sit on a shelf this Christmas. Let me know what you think in the comments. For this Kirkland's inspired DIY, I used these wooden Christmas trees from my stash. I got them from either Dollar Tree or Dollar General last year. I began by removing all the parts from the trees, like the hangers on the back and the florals on the front. I originally painted over the words of one tree, and you could still see the outline. I didn't want that showing, so I sanded the words off of the trees with some 220 grit sandpaper. I painted each of the trees with black acrylic paint. I used my Cricut and cut out the word Merry. I think I used the Arial font, but I'm not positive. I applied the letters to each of the trees. And then used an X-Acto knife to cut away the parts of the letters in the indentions of the tree. I placed 12 20mm wood beads on a skewer and painted them with black acrylic paint. I found that placing the beads on skewers is the easiest way to paint them without getting paint all over your hands. I still get paint on my fingers, but not everywhere like I have in the past. I drilled 2 holes towards the top of each tree so I could thread a string through them. And then place some painter's tape around some macrame cord. I worked from the end, stringing everything onto the cord. I placed 2 beads and then the letter, starting with the Y. I threaded the trees by letting the cord run behind them instead of across the front. I thought this just looked better. I love how this merry banner turned out. Now, I just have to find somewhere to hang it since I don't have a mantel in my home. For this project, I stained 2 Dollar Tree drawers with some gel stain I have in my stash. And also painted a paper mache box with red chalk paint. On one of the stained boxes, I distressed it with white chalk paint Using hot glue, I wrapped this red ribbon around the box and glued it to the bottom. I made a little twine bow by wrapping some twine around my fingers and hot glue in the center, and glued it to the top of the little box. For the second stain box, I used my favorite plaid stencil from my Amazon store and applied red stencil paste. I did this around the entire box. I hot glued ribbon, twine, and Christmas florals to this box. I glued the lid to the red paper mache box and then wrapped the side of the box with this ribbon from my stash. I cut little notches in the ribbon around the bottom so the box would sit flat when I glued it down. I decided I didn't like the top being red, so I found the center of the lid using a ruler and wrapped twine around it, hot gluing it into place. I continued wrapping the lid until it was completely covered with the twine. I glued some Christmas greenery and a pine cone to the top and finished it off with a little red bow. And just look at how cute all of the little present boxes turned out. They are perfect to sit on a table or use on a tiare tray this holiday season. For this Kirkland's inspired DIY, I used plastic bowls and candlesticks from Dollar Tree. I took the bowls outside and painted them with Rust-Oleum apple red spray paint. I took the short candlestick and broke the end off by moving it back and forth until it broke. I wanted to use it on the bottom of the bowls. I used some leather ribbon from my stash and hot glued it around the bowl. The hardest part was trying to get the leather straight so it wasn't wonky looking. I turned the largest bowl over and used Gorilla Clear Grip glue and hot glue to attach the bottom portion of the candlestick to the plastic bowl. I glued down a candlestick in the center of the largest bowl with the Gorilla Glue. I placed the candlestick in the center of the bowl and then went around the bottom of the candlestick with hot glue. I applied the Gorilla Glue to the top of the candlestick and then attached one of the smaller bowls to the top. I used my Cricut and created belt buckles for the bowls and then cut them out on gold vinyl. Instead of using transfer tape, I simply used my weeding tool to remove the vinyl from the backing and attach the vinyl to the bowls over the leather ribbon. And that's when the top bowl came off. I didn't let it dry long enough before handling it. Since the Gorilla Glue was still wet, I just went around the top again with hot glue to hold it until the Gorilla Glue had time to set up. And this is the Kirkland inspiration. I thought it was so cute and wanted an inexpensive way to create one for myself. I think the transformation of these Dollar Tree plastic bowls turned out amazing. Let me know what you think in the comments. I picked up this adorable little red farm truck from Hobby Lobby. Using my Cricut, I cut out some vinyl for the side door of the truck and applied it. I placed some hot glue in the back of the truck and attached a piece of styrofoam with 3 little Christmas trees in the back. And just look at how adorable. I think this is one of the quickest decor items ever. And it's so stinking adorable. Let me know what you think in the comments. I've had this cute little barn in my stash for quite a while. I recently picked up some cute snowflake scrap paper and decided I'd cover the barn with it. I turned the paper over and traced around the barn with a pencil. Next, I used my scissors to cut the barn shape out. I laid the paper on top of the barn and rubbed around the top edge to make an indentation so I could cut it down to fit the front. I tried to remove the wood from the top of the barn, but it just would not budge. I trimmed away the excess. And of course, I trimmed it a little too much in this area. Since the red really showed, I decided to just paint the barn gray. I didn't want to get any gray paint on the wood section, so I taped it off with some painter's tape and removed the original paper from the barn. I added the gray paint to the front and the sides of the barn. I added a layer of Mod Podge and then the scrapbook paper. I used a fingernail file and went around the edges to remove any more excess paper. And then added another layer of Mod Podge over the top. I also went back and painted all the red with the gray paint. I used my Cricut and cut out some white vinyl that says the most wonderful time of the year and applied it using transfer tape. I thought the white would pop against the darker colors in the scrapbook paper, but it didn't turn out like I saw it in my head. I may try this again and use a different color of vinyl, maybe gold. I'm not sure. Let me know what color of vinyl or if you would have done something else to the front of the barn in the comments. If you've been following me for a while, you know I've been trying to use mostly out of my stash this year, and I have a ton of tumbling tower blocks. I used some to create a wood Christmas tree. I figured out the design I wanted to go with first. Craft sticks to hold the blocks together. I cut the craft sticks using a pair of miter shears from my Amazon store. I added Dollar Tree wood glue to one side of each of the blocks. And used a square to make sure the blocks were as square and level as possible. I added hot glue to the cut down craft stick and placed it on the back of the blocks. For the bottom layer, I used 7 tumbling tower blocks. I did the same thing for the next layer, but used 5 of the tumbling tower blocks. For the third row, I used 3 blocks. And on the top, I used 1. I connected all of the rows together with wood glue. And I used a cut down small craft stick to hold the single block to the row beneath. And a cut down large craft stick to hold the other 3 rows together while the wood glue dried. I used antiquing wax and a baby wipe to stain the tree. For the stand, I used 2 sets of 3 blocks and glued them together with wood glue. I used a single block and attached it to the back of the tree and to the stand. To complete the tree, I painted the stand with black chalk paint. And just look at how stinking cute. Just adorable and perfect for Christmas. I found this little sled in my stash. It was cute, but it just doesn't go with my Christmas decor. The first thing I did was remove all the stuff from it. I used whatever tool I could find. This was a tough job. Whoever had attached all this didn't want it to ever come off. But eventually, I had everything removed without doing too much damage. The sled was dirty and dusty. I used some awesome cleaner and cleaned the entire sled. Finally, a clean surface to work with. I used a sanding block and lightly sanded it so the new paint would stick, and then wiped it down with more awesome cleaner. I took the sled outside and spray painted it with white spray paint. It took several coats to cover this red. I used my laser to engrave this small piece of wood for the side of the sleigh, but this could also be done using a vinyl cutter. I attached the sign to the sleigh with hot glue. And honestly, I can't believe this is the same sleigh. I added some florals and gifts, and now I have a new Christmas decor item. I think it turned out pretty amazing. Let me know what you think in the comments. For this DIY, I used some aluminum wire from Hobby Lobby. I pulled up from the middle and cut the wire. You don't have to do it from the middle. You can also pull it from the end. After placing the first bead onto the wire, I realized I needed to straighten the wire out. As you can see, I left a little curve at the end of the wire so the beads wouldn't fall off. I used some white beads I found in my stash. I'm pretty sure these came from my Amazon store, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I started out with 24 beads and placed them onto the aluminum wire. And then began twisting the wire into the shape of a Christmas tree. And realized I needed to add a few more beads so the bottom would sit flat. I added 10 more beads for a total of 34. I twisted and trimmed the end on the bottom of the tree. And then messed around with it until I was happy with the way it looked. I used a pair of jewelry pliers to lift the end on the top and used clear Gorilla Glue and a dab of hot glue to attach a small rusty star to the top of the tree. And I just love how this turned out. It is perfect for a Christmas tier tray. I lightly sanded a piece of Dollar Tree wood and then applied a layer of antiquing wax using a baby wipe. I also applied the antiquing wax to one of the small Dollar Tree blocks. I added some green paint and water to a cup and mixed it well to create a green stain for the rest of the Dollar Tree blocks. I used a piece of painter's tape and placed the blocks on it. I was trying not to get the bandage on my finger too dirty. I simply painted the stain mixture onto the blocks and continued adding green paint until I liked the color on the blocks. Once everything was dry, I found the center of the board and marked it with a pencil. I glued down all the blocks with hot glue in the shape of a little Christmas tree. I added a couple of rusty stars to the top of the tree and then distressed the tree with white chalk paint. And just look at how stinking cute it turned out. I think it is so adorable. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I used an SVG file from Design Bundles to create these adorable standing Christmas trees using my laser cutter. Once I had them sized and cut, I began by painting each of them. I painted one with gray, one black, and one white. Y'all know how I am with these colors. They are my favorites. And of course, you don't have to use these colors. Make them your own with your color scheme. You could even use scrapbook paper on them. Once the paint was dry, I used a white paint marker and put dots all over the gray tree. I used a silver paint marker on the black tree. And a black paint marker on the white tree. I used tumbling tower blocks to create the bases for the trees so they would stand up by themselves. I glued the tumbling tower blocks together with Dollar Tree wood glue. I placed a line of wood glue on the side of the block and then rubbed it with a wet finger and placed it next to the other block. I used a square to make sure the blocks were straight so they wouldn't be wonky looking. To hold the pieces into place I placed painter's tape around each set. After the glue had set up and dried, I removed the painter's tape and stained each set of blocks with antiquing wax using a baby wipe. Next, I stained 3 of these little Dollar Tree wood blocks the same way. I dried all the blocks with my heat gun and then began assembling each tree on its stand. I placed the small block towards the center of the base using hot glue, and then attached the tree to the block. I did the same thing with the other 2 trees, and just look at how stinking cute. I think this set of Christmas trees turned out so amazing. They are going to be perfect displayed along with the other Christmas decorations I have. I used a paper mache cone and this chunky white yarn to make an adorable Christmas tree. And I have to say, this is one of the simplest Christmas DIYs ever. I applied hot glue in small sections and then placed the yarn on it. The only problem with this DIY is watch your fingers, or use the little silicone finger protectors. I burnt myself several times. I continued wrapping the yarn until I reached the top. I think I'm going to make a gnome hat with a smaller cone. I think that would be so stinking cute. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And just look at how adorable this Christmas tree turned out. In this video, I will show you how to create adorable Christmas shadow boxes using Dollar Tree signs. The signs were already white, so I didn't have to paint them. I did glue scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby to the inside of both and added some nautical rope from Dollar Tree. The first thing was to stain the tree trunks with Waverly wax. I applied the stain with a Dollar Tree makeup sponge and then wiped it off with a paper towel. The pieces of wood I'm using are leftovers from previous projects, so there was very little cutting that I had to do for this. I used leftover tree pieces for the trees. The scrapbook paper I'm using I got from Tuesday Morning. I think I got it for about $5 for a 25-piece pack. I cut the scrapbook paper down so it would fit on the tree. I then used Mod Podge to glue the paper to the wood. I got this little brush out of the makeup section at Dollar Tree. The brushes work great for applying Mod Podge and also for painting. The bristles don't fall out like regular cheap paint brushes. I folded the edges over the wood and glued them down also. I went ahead and glued the small tree and the trunk to the box. I cut down the scrapbook paper for the larger tree and used Mod Podge the same way I did for the smaller tree. I wanted the second tree to stick out a little, so I used a tumbling tower block and hot glued it to the back of the tree. I also went ahead and glued the trunk to the tree. I made sure it was going to fit and then hot glued the second tree to the box. And just look at how adorable the first Christmas tree shadow box turned out. For the second box, I hot glued 2 pieces of wood together to make one tree. I wanted this tree to be made with twine, so I added a bead of glue at the bottom of the tree and then placed the twine in the bead of glue. I did this for the first few rows of the tree, and then I just started wrapping the twine until I got closer to the top, adding glue just when I needed it. Once I got to the top, I still didn't really like how it looked, so I just started wrapping the twine in different patterns up and down the tree. I attached a block and the trunk to the back of the tree. And just look at how stinking cute they turned out. Let me know in the comments what you think. For this project, I used a sign I had already prepared by gluing 3 1x4s together using Gorilla Wood glue and staining the entire piece. I wanted the sign to have a warm, distressed look. So after I painted it white, I took it outside and sanded it using some 220 sandpaper. After sanding, I sprayed rubbing alcohol onto the sign and wiped it down to remove all the dust. Using a tape measure, I found the center of my sign and made a little mark with a pencil. I created this design in Design Space using parts and pieces of other designs I had gotten from design bundles. You'll find a link to design bundles in the description. I started placing the vinyl on the sign, keeping in mind the middle. Some of the pieces were large enough that I didn't use transfer tape, but others I had to. And now for my secret. When I do vinyl on wood, I always use my iron and a thin piece of cloth to help the vinyl melt into the cracks and crevices of the wood. This helps the vinyl stick better and gives the piece more of a hand-painted than a vinyl look. After the first try, I still didn't like the way the vinyl was laying, so I ironed the sign again. It's funny because I will iron my wood signs, but I'll toss a shirt in the dryer to get out of having to iron it. I really hate ironing. You can't really tell it here, but the vinyl has actually melted just a little into the cracks and crevices of the wood. I used an electric staple gun to staple some Dollar Tree nautical rope onto the back of the sign so it could be hung on a wall. Once I was finished, I hung the sign up and simply fell in love with it. It turned out so stinking cute. Let me know in the comments if you have any tips or tricks when it comes to making vinyl signs. I used several of these mini wood rounds from Dollar Tree to make mini wood round Christmas ornaments. All of these turned out so stinking cute. You will be making them too. I painted the first round with Waverly Steel chalk paint. and dried it with my heat gun. I applied and buffed chalk couture surface wax onto the round. I cut down this chalk couture transfer so it was more manageable for smaller projects. I applied the transfer and then applied a layer of bright white paste. I removed the excess and then lifted the transfer off. I used this Merry Christmas transfer and chalked the words Merry Christmas towards the bottom of the wood round. I applied a layer of Mod Podge to protect and seal the ornament. I strung a piece of twine through the hole. And I created a small bow with some Hobby Lobby ribbon and applied some small berries and the bow to the mini wood round. I love how the buffalo plaid turned out on this mini wood round ornament, and the striped bow was the perfect touch. For the second wood round, I applied a piece of painter's tape across the center of the round. I painted the top half of the round with Waverly antiquing wax. After the wax was dry, I applied another piece of tape over the stained portion of the round and painted the bottom of the round with Folk Art Imperial Red chalk paint. I used my Cricut, cut out the wording, and applied it to the wood round. I used some buffalo check wired ribbon and twine to create a small bow and hot glued it to the top of the mini wood round. And just look at how stinking cute it turned out. It'll look perfect on a Christmas tree. For the third ornament, I painted the entire wood round with Folk Art Imperial Red chalk paint. And dried it with my heat gun. I applied a layer of surface wax and used this reusable mesh transfer I got from Amazon. I really need to order another one of these. I have used this one so much, it really doesn't have that much stick any longer. I applied chalk couture black velvet to the transfer, removed the excess, and then removed the transfer. I cut out the phrase Merry Christmas, y'all with my Cricut and applied it to the wood round. And this was a little tricky because the vinyl didn't want to stick. I think that was because of the wax I had used, but I did eventually get it on there. I applied a layer of Mod Podge and a few embellishments to the top. And just look at how stinking cute it turned out. For the fourth ornament, I painted the entire round with Waverly Elephant chalk paint and dried it with my heat gun. Using my Cricut again, I cut out the phrase "Let It Snow" and applied it to the wood round. I then used a little Chalk Couture snowflake transfer. I first applied bright white chalk paste and then went over it with shimmer frost paste to give it a little shimmer. To finish it off, I made a little messy bow and hot glued it to the top. I think this is my favorite mini wood round ornament, but it's really hard to decide. For the fifth ornament, I painted the entire round with Waverly White chalk paint and dried it with my heat gun. I placed a piece of painter's tape about 1/3 of the way down and painted the bottom portion with Folk Art Imperial Red chalk paint. I removed the tape and repositioned it onto the red portion of the round. I added another piece of tape, leaving about 1/4 of an inch of the white showing. I painted the stripe with Waverly ink chalk paint. I removed the tape and had a little gap, so I just free-handed the gap with the Waverly ink. I used my Cricut to cut out "Ho Ho Ho" and applied the vinyl to the wood round. I also used my Cricut to cut out a small belt buckle and applied it. After applying a layer of Mod Podge to protect and seal the ornament, I strung a piece of twine through the hole and tied a simple bow and hot glued it to the ornament. And just look at how sweet this little mini wood round Christmas ornament turned out. All of these ornaments turned out so stinking cute, I can't decide which one I like the best. Let me know in the comments which one of these ornaments you like the best. Please take a second to like this video and leave me a comment. This really helps my channel to grow so others just like yourself can find me. If you just found me, I hope you will join our little family by hitting the subscribe button. If you are already part of the family, thank you so much for your love and support. Y'all are the absolute best. Check out my new Amazon store for craft supply and farmhouse home decor recommendations. All the products I use from Amazon in my videos can be found there. Until next time, happy crafting!